Hello, I'm George Shear, Executive Director of the Contemporary Arts Center, and welcome to Make America What America Must Become. Together with my co-curator Katrina Newman and Takara Thomas, who helped consult on this exhibition, we're pleased to present a set of vital works that are truly responsive to this moment and this season of political and American history. The title and theme of this exhibition is drawn from a letter written by American commentator and philosopher James Baldwin. In a letter to his nephew on the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, he wrote, "Great men have done great things here and will again, and we can make America what America must become." 400 artists from across the Gulf South responded to this call, and 34 artists from 5 states are presented in this show. Please join myself and co-curator Katrina Newman as we take you through this virtual exhibition.
I believe as you walk through the exhibition, there are kind of landscapes that you traverse with every single piece of work. And the landscapes come from urban environments to rural environments to everything in between and nothing seen.
The show is staged in a way where the visitor begins and ends with 3 key works. Adam Farcus's Scream Chorus, Jackson Bean's Until the Rain Can Help You Mourn and Pray to the Killed, and Jeffrey Derensburg's and Fernando Lopez's Hoktuwi, 2 poems in Ishikoi. I expect visitors will take note as they enter, but maybe not dwell on those works. Instead, they'll be drawn to Luis Cruz Azaceta's Crisis and Light at the End of the Abyss, a kind of diptych which frames the show, and hopefully they'll also be taken with Stephen Paul Day's Humorous for the Love of Lincoln, which nods to the Democrats and Republicans' competing claim to the President Lincoln's legacy. But as they move through the exhibition, I expect its breadth of concepts and ideas will evoke a spectrum of responses. Lionel Milton's Social Distance, Social Justice is a jolt. It's a jolt into the raw moment where virus and protest converge. Suesenya's paintings, 32 Days and Trophy, as gorgeous as they are, evoke the frightful presence of idealism, nationalism, and individualism in today's politics. Christine Thompson's Images Seen to Images Felt are photograms that literally pull from our computer screens the daily encounter we have with violence in the media, a violence which simultaneously desensitizes us and leaves us with an unprocessed feeling of anxiety. But then you arrive at Rosalie Smith's My Mother's Last Garden, a graveyard of flowers collected through her mother's battle with cancer. So personal, so intimate. And to stand at the edge of something that so many of us have faced in some way or another is heartbreaking.
There's, of course, this inescapable grief and trying time, but there are bits of silver linings in there, whether it's the tenacity of parents who had tried for 10 years and they finally got their letter to come back after being deported, like in Delilah Senbria's work. I think we all want to believe that there is hope. We have to, right? I believe that there are moments of lightness that are worth seeking out as well within the exhibition.
At the far side of the exhibition, the works that look deeply into this nation's difference through identity, through lenses of race and immigration, migration, rural and urban experience, and geography, are really powerful, beautiful. We hear stories and see expressions of people arriving to, holding on to, digging into, being pushed out of, being detained in, and returning to this place, our nation.
Another part of the exhibition that I'm interested in is this moment of labor that's being addressed in the corner with the textile works. The work itself is quite laborious, right? The white painting by Veronica, Ceci, and washing and washing and washing and washing until this work is so ragged, and that washing and that cleaning comes from labor. Gabriel Martinez's quilt painting as well, demonstrates that in a different way. If you look closely enough, you get to see the stains from the people actually wearing it. He described the work as not just about the people wearing it, but the people before before they even bought that fashion. I think about Coulter Fusel's work and this kind of uniforms worn by a particular working class of that rural place in Mississippi where she lives. And then you go on, of course, to Christelle Lemonius's work. In this work, it's tenderly and tactily sewn together. These baby clothes that actually were collected and from her mother's work, and her mother and her mother's community of Caribbean Black Americans, and to take care of that of white Americans. For Lemonius, it was important to represent and to show and to be seen this type of labor for respect.
The breadth of topics that make up the exhibition may create different volumes of emotion, varied decibels of anxiety that mirror the under-interrogated anxieties that we daily feel in America.
I think there is something that you wander through that's somewhere in between like absurd and dreamlike and very real, and back again into a dreamlike state.
As much as we may sit in a very raw moment, this exhibition of Gulf South artists is not simply about this moment. Even as we feel torn apart, these works reflect the power and purpose artists hold for us as a community and as a nation. And so, as the visitor leaves the show, they pass again the Scream Chorus, where they're invited to meditatively exhaust that anxious energy in their hearts. They are invited to take seeds from Jackson Beans Until the Rain as a way of marking, memorializing, and letting loss linger. And as they leave, they hear again Darren Burke's poem.
Oktiwe. Katkosh koikit. Ishaktesh. Okyan. Yukit he man. Yalpeyulat. Shokshosh. Shoksho. Wang sholkit. Sikit tat. Nautol walwashtit.
I hope there are surprises. I hope you are surprised. I hope there's work that makes you stop. And I hope that there's work that makes you proud.
Hi, good evening. My name is Takara Alexandra Holmes Thomas, and I was one of the curatorial consultants on the show. Welcome. Tonight, we're going to have an amazing panel. I'm very, very excited. I'm going to start by introducing each of our artists, and then we will head into questions. So joining us, we have Derek Woods Mark. My name is Takara Alexandra Holmes Thomas, and I was one of.
Sorry, it was the feed.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry. No worries. Okay, wonderful. The realities of technology. All right. So joining us was Derek Woods Morrow. Derek Woods Morrow received his MFA in photography from the School of Art Institute of Chicago in 2016, and was most recently an adjunct assistant professor of photography and teaching artist at the University of Illinois Chicago. His work has been exhibited in collaboration with Paul Sakua in the 2019 Whitney Biennial and the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago and YNCI 5, Detroit Art Week Expo, and Photography Now, The Searchers, curated by Maurice Berger and Marvin Heffenman at the Center for Photography at Woodstock. And downtime on the art of retreat at the Smart Museum Chicago. In the winter of 2019, his second short film, Much Handled Things Are Always Soft, debuted in collaboration with Visual Aid's 30th Annual Day Without Art programming at the Whitney Museum of American Art, Museum of Contemporary Art LA, the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, the Brooklyn Museum, the New Museum, and over 100 institutions worldwide. He is the 20th Edith and Philip Leonian Fellow at the Center for Photography Woodstock, an alum of the Fire Island Residency, Chicago Artists Coalition Bolt Residency, and is a recipient of the 2018 Artadia Awards. We also have Annie Laurie Erickson. Annie Laurie is a visual artist and educator working at the intersection of photography, installation, and research practices. She currently serves as the head of photography and an associate professor in the Newcomb Art Department of Tulane University. Erickson's work has been exhibited widely in the US and abroad, including Higher Pictures NYC, Goethe Institute, Washington, D.C., Photographic Center Northwest, New Space Center for Photography, Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts, Boston Center for the Arts. Notable press include The New Yorker, Huffington Post, Oxford American, Washington Post, and among others. Erickson received an Atlas Award grant to develop her project Data Shadows and has been awarded residencies from Yaddo, A Studio in the Woods, and the Joan Mitchell Center. She received her MFA from the School of Art Chicago Institute and Institute of Chicago, and her BFA from the Rhode Island School of Design. Also joining us is Lauren Cardenas. Lauren holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Painting, Printmaking, and Drawing from Southwestern University in Georgetown, Texas. She is a Tamarind Institute Printer Training Program graduate and holds a Master's of Fine Arts in Visual Art with a focus in print media from Washington University in St. Louis. Her artwork has been exhibited nationally and internationally, and she has co-curated many exhibitions that make strides to bridge the gap between art and literature. She was awarded the University of Nevada, Reno Black Rock Press Redfield Fellowship. In collaboration with poet Daniel Enrique Perez, she created a limited edition artist book, Things You See in the Dark. She was the editor and founder of an art and biennial literary magazine, Pie Crust Magazine, and a founding member of an active part of the steering committee of the St. Louis Small Press Expo. She currently is the assistant professor and area head of printmaking and the assistant gallery director of 130 at the University of Mississippi. Finally, joining us is Jeffrey Derensberg. Jeffrey is a writer, public speaker, researcher, zine maker, and provocateur. Jeffrey is a member of the Atacapa Ishak Nation of Southwest Louisiana and Southeast Texas. He is the founder and editor of Who's Not and chief of Balbunka Is Still a Place, Indigenous Culture from New Orleans. recently a writer and residence at Tulane University's A Studio in the Woods, and Monroe Fellow of New Orleans Center for the Gulf South at Tulane. Jeffrey is working on a book-length study of the Azaceta Ishak of Southwest Louisiana. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I had the pleasure of seeing the show last night for the first time in person, and I have to say I was moved to tears. And I gotten the pleasure of spending quite a few months with all of y'all's work, but I think that one, just seeing the show together and experiencing the work in person was deeply moving. I think that also the timing of me previewing the work after hearing about the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I think really underlined this idea of us really reaching this crossroad about what America must become, at least for the immediate future. And so I think that along with the coming election and just truly everything that's happening in the world, I think that this show will really hit hard for a lot of people in ways that are difficult, in ways that are inspiring, in ways that are challenging, and just an awakening of sorts. So I just want to thank all of you for the amazing contributions to the show. So I'd like to start off with the question of about your involvement in the show. So each of you have brought to the show very personal reflections on identity and being, and I think on the surface they seem just very current, but I think that the works and the themes that all of you are exploring really point to these contentious realities that have been part of the American experience for a very long time. So I would love to hear each of you talk about your personal process for developing the works that are in the show. Any takers? I can jump out there.
So the pieces of mine that are included in the exhibition are a part of a project that I started around 2013 called Data Shadows, which I think it was around that time when a lot of us first started to develop this sense that our hope for what our digital future kind of could and should be, the hope of an empowering and democratizing digital future, was turning into something very, very different. And that the forces controlling the direction that data collection and our digital lives were taking were very much hidden forces and hidden very much on purpose. And so a big part of my initial impetus when I started this project was a desire to use photography to simply peer back and look at these unseen structures powering the field of big data. And so I wanted to build an archive of the facilities where our data is actually processed. You know, I think we're well aware now, it's not some magical cloud. It's housed in actual places with endless amounts of fiber optic cable and server farms and routers that take up tons of space, land, and resources. So for about more than 6 years now, I've traveled all over to photograph data centers, initially in the US, then Europe, and most recently South America, with the goal of building this archive of source material to then use to produce interactive eye tracking installations, which relates to a piece in the show, as well as traditional and sculptural photographic works. But they all think about the relationships between our physical and our virtual worlds, between our bodies and our environment, and our data, and the kind of forces that are at play and trying to control all of those things in different ways. So there's a video piece included in the show that selectively overlays some of my photographs of data centers, of interiors, with moving screen captures of Google Maps imagery of Google data centers. And in that iteration, I try to write watching me, watching you, letter by letter with my eyes through one of my eye tracking installations as this kind of signifier of looking back into the surveillance apparatus. And then the other piece is called user agreement. And in terms of the technique with this work, I use data bending processes to manipulate my documentation photographs of data centers and servers by altering their digital code. I think by now we're like well aware that we're always in this position where we have to choose between privacy and access to digital tools, culture, and information. And that's really not a fair choice. So as an illustration of this, user agreement incorporates the text from all the Google user agreements since this practice began in 1999 to point to the impossibility of like actually comprehending that information, to kind of point to the fact that like it's not something the general public we didn't consciously agree to it, and because it's so unprecedented, it's difficult to perceive and really see what's happening. So just to wrap, I feel like I'm blabbering, but to wrap this up, the work that I have in the exhibition, I really wanted to think about how we have become the kind of free raw material for a new and I think very problematic form of capitalism that's stealing, monetizing, and manipulating our private experiences. So I'll stop there. That was more than enough.
Thank you. Lauren, would you care to answer next?
Sure. So the work that's in the show is it's entitled #Sueño Americano, and it's called In-Flight Meal on Ice Air. And this is actually kind of new territory for me as an artist of kind of exploring my bifurcated Mexican American identity. And I think it started to hit during 2016. It was something that started to resonate. And so the work is inspired by an NPR article specifically about deportation and the zero tolerance that the Trump administration had kind of issued. And the piece, so they are Kraft American cheese slices with printed images of airplane window shots that are then transferred onto the cheese, and then the image is then pressed between two pieces of plexiglass to kind of mimic an airplane window. And these individuals, one of the quotes was they're getting on a plane and they're given a paper bag full of just a cheese sandwich and a bottle of water. And these individuals have never flown on a plane before and coming to America to either reunite with their family members or come for work or fulfill that idea of this American dream that ends up being this American nightmare. And so the quote was, it was just a brown paper bag and a cheese sandwich, no meat, just American cheese. And that quote just kind of resonated. And I was trying to figure out how could I kind of execute this this kind of thought-provoking statement from an individual who was trying to come to the States. And the border has always been a tenuous topic. And I think 2016 just kind of brought it to the forefront. My parents were raised along the border in Laredo. I've had a relationship with crossing into Mexico for daily activities of going to the market. And then that just became something that doesn't happen anymore. My mother lives in Brownsville, Texas. And so it's kind of surreal going to visit and seeing detention centers and the wall kind of going between individuals' backyards and orchards, and everyone kind of continuing to move forward because that is what they have to do. And so I don't know, I was just thinking of how do I kind of bring that to the forefront in a simple gesture and kind of talk about that. And so these were things that I've been starting to think about and kind of illustrate through the work, through print media. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeffrey?
Thank you so much. And I'm really enjoying hearing about all of these projects. I can't wait to see the exhibition myself. I guess I have two pieces of media in the exhibition. One are some excerpts from a zine that I am editor who's not a chief of, which is called Bulbancha is Still a Place, Indigenous Culture from, and we put this in quotes, New Orleans. I do live in Bulbancha. I reject the notion that anyone can rename the place I live just because they're white. And so I reject that there is a place called New Orleans. And uh, my indigenous relatives and friends, we have put together a publication that showcases indigenous voices here that are often silent. And the co-editor of that publication is my brother from another mother, Ozone 504, and we have excerpts there. And that was a response to a lack of indigenous representation here in the city in general, but also in media about Louisiana, media about the city, even in discussions of things where we're direct contributors, such as Louisiana's food culture, for example, or Louisiana's music culture. The other piece here that was mentioned in the tour is a film I did with Fernando Lopez, an indigenous filmmaker here, called Hoptiwe, Two Poems in Ishikoi. In the spring, during quarantine, I was largely isolated. I was at Studio in the Woods, which is an arts campus Tulane has on the West Bank here. And there were supposed to be other people in residence, but because of quarantine, in general, they could not go there. And yet I was working on writings about my people, writings about indigenous people here in Bulbancha. I ended up working on a book called Hoktiwe Bulbancha, which is of indigenous interpretations of this area and historical events, cultural things, etc. And I was been working on our tribal language, Ishikoi, for about a year and a half now. And so those are two poems I did in Ishikoi. One is one I wrote in Ishikoi itself. I find it's easier to write in the language itself rather than to translate from English, because there are concepts that are difficult to come across from English. I translated Black Lives Matter into Ishikoi, which is Kushmil Pistaksush, and there's no analog for matter, so I had to come up with genuine and big. So Black lives are genuine and big. And believe me, in Ishikoi, that's saying something. So please accept that it does mean Black Lives Matter. The other poem is a cento, which is a type of writing that goes back to classical antiquity when people used to remix lines of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And so in my isolation at Studio in the Woods, I compiled 650 note cards of example sentences in our language that were taken from various sources, and I remixed them into several poems, one of which is the second poem called Hoptiwe, which means we are together. And I really felt working on those poems and consulting linguists via Zoom and consulting native scholars via Zoom and checking in with tribal relatives all the time while I was in isolation, that I was very much together with those people. So even though in the film, it's just me, it's a lot of me in the film. I mean, not just my words, my music, Fernando's images, but also a lot of my human body walking around. The poems are about the ways in which we are together, even in isolation, in which we carry each other from a distance. And I felt a very strong connection with my ethnic identity as a member of the Atakapa Ishak Nation, even in isolation, as I interacted with the words of ancestors recorded in the 1880s and 1920s when linguists from the Smithsonian came to work with us on our language. And it was a very powerful experience for me, and I was very happy. I have to say, in our tribal language, Hueo, thank you for allowing me to share it at the CAC.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And Derek?
Hey there. It's beautiful hearing everyone talk about their work. So thank you for letting me be a part of it. So much of my work is this connection to just thinking about like where I want to see us go, and where we came from, and the things we've been denied, specifically as Black and queer people throughout history. I grew up in the South and had a connection to water, and really began this project in about 2018, which in the exhibition, there's two photographs, photographs taken on Lincoln Beach, which is this beach like built for Black people out of segregation, out of integration. There's a history, and in so many ways it's been written out of history, but it's much about redlining and leisure denied to Black people. Um, and so throughout my process, there's only 2 photographs in the show, but it's pretty interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. So there's a lot of things happening. There's sort of a performative aspect in which I actually just meet queer, Black, trans people throughout the South and begin dialogues with them about histories. And then we sort of play, right? Because I think that's something that can be activism, is being playful for Black people and the access to play, especially since so many of us, at a certain age, age 8 or 9, you think of Tamir Rice, like, are considered adults, right? Right? Like, to be a Black boy is to be a Black man way too early. And so I tend to connect with these Black adults who are trans, queer, um, and we begin to play for hours, sort of in a performative way. And then I document this sort of reconnection with land that maybe people before us weren't allowed to play on, or they were allowed to play on under very specific guidelines. In other parts of my practice, I'll actually excavate land from these sites and move them to exhibition spaces. And then people will perform in these exhibition spaces, oftentimes in garb that is created from this history, right? So there's this other archival part of my practice where I go into archives like the Amistad Foundation or the Historic New Orleans Collection, and I actually pull images from Jim Crow of Black folks already seeking leisure, and I make custom toile, custom fabric pieces out of them, and people perform in them as well. So this piece, and I actually really just began this work in 2018 and out of a need to connect with the South again. But it's growing. Then there's performance and there's video and there's photography, and you're getting 2 punctuated moments of connecting with folks in New Orleans in my work in the exhibition.
Thank you. So I think Derek, especially, I think your points about your works in the show is sort of a great jumping off point to this area and the letter that the show borrows its name from, that Baldwin wrote. And so there's this quote where he says, that our countrymen have destroyed and are destroying hundreds of thousands of lives and do not know it and do not want to know it. He later says that we with love shall force our brothers to see themselves as they are, to cease fleeing from reality and begin to change it. For this is your home, my friend. Do not be driven from it. And so I think that each of you does this, I think, differently in terms of this idea of holding up a mirror. And I think that, Derek, for your work, it's holding up a mirror, but I didn't see it so much as for audiences outside of the community that you're representing being the priority, but more so the audience that you're representing being the priority. And so I think that I would sort of just be interested to hear about why that matters to you, why making work specifically for a specific community and having that community visible in a specific way is a call to action for others in a way.
Yeah, I think at the bottom of my email, I can't remember what the signature exactly is, but it's like, to see us wholly in the future, and that us being some of us, not all of us, right? The queer us, or the people who agree with me about Black sexual freedoms, right? And so I wanted to make some work about that connection, because as a young boy, I had a sexuality, and people don't want to talk about that, right? Like I knew I was queer at 3. People don't want to talk about that. And I was more free then too, to express that in a way, right? To just run around on the playground and exist. And I sort of want to give space for that sort of playful interaction with coming to terms with your sexuality, or coming to terms with how you exist. And there's also this history that I am trying to contend with, like a Black American history that is unjust, racially inequitable, and also sort of, unwritten. I think if, I don't know the number, right? But the amount of slaves who died on the way here, like how many of those folks are trans and queer, right? That we don't talk about, or we don't consider, or it's not talked about in the history book, right? And so as we connect to like this edge of land and sea in my work, I'm trying to return people to that place, but maybe give new light. There's the histories of Black women getting their hair wet, and I want to make a video of just Black women running into the ocean, in my work. But yeah, so much of it, and there is an aspect of wanting to be a little bit didactic, right? Like in the darkness in my photographs, I make very large scale, dense, dark photographs that have an immense amount of information in them. There's all the information for what you can see, but you can't just pass it by. Like for the ongoing viewer, the white viewer who might just see it, if you want to come to terms with us, you need to come and see us. So you need to get up in those photographs, right? All the data is there. If you just walk by it, that's okay too. I'm okay with that. But I think there's also this transition in my work where I stopped making work for the white audience and I started making work for us so that we could see ourselves happy. We can see a future version of ourselves in my work.
Thank you. And I think, Jeffrey, I'm hearing, I think, something similar in terms of this idea of rejecting certain language and talking about place and history. And so, as someone who's new to New Orleans and thinking about the rejection of this name for people who are also from New Orleans and all the different ways that means, I'm really just sort of interested in how you see that challenging the way that people are thinking about their place here.
Well, the first time I even mentioned Bulbancha to someone at a cocktail party of a very well-known local cultural institution, they laughed at me, and a historian told me, like, well, if that were a thing, I would know about it, even though the first ever French painting to label this area uses the word, the first ever French book published about this area uses the word. Maybe historians don't read anymore. I like to hope they do. But there is a sense in which people will laugh at you until you actually ask them to defend why they're laughing at you. And when they're asked to defend, well, why is it wrong to use our indigenous name for this place? And make them defend it. Make them defend their notion that white people can rename anything that we have anytime they want, and then we're stuck with it. And some people will say 300 years, they've been doing it for 300 years. Well, for indigenous peoples in this continent, 300 years is a nothing amount of time. It's really nothing for us. I mean, even in terms of our memory, if I have a memory of a story between my great-great-grandparents, indigenous people, of something that took place with them in the 1880s that we still talk about. Well, that's half the time that New Orleans has been here. Nothing. And so a lot of the work I do is attempting to help indigenous people or any group of people who feels they've been overlooked. Maybe they're queer people. We do feature queer voices in the media, we do, because being queer is something indigenous people traditionally are very accepting of. We recognize more than two genders, etc. We have a contribution to a number of discussions that I think people should know. And indigenous people who feel overlooked, who feel uncomfortable about their identity, who don't want to use their languages or even parts of their language, I guess if my work can help them to think, look, we have something real to contribute. We have something deep, something that is deeply part of our identity that's important. And in spite of what anyone else says, in spite of what any media says about us, from the most racist Western films of the 1920s to the Twilight series, which in spite of all its fans, still can't just present indigenous people as human beings. We are here, my collaborators and I, to say we are human, we're valuable, and we can express ourselves. And here's when we can do it. I also want to say that Monique Verdun, who is another artist in this exhibit, who's Homa and from here, has been tremendously influential on us just by opening that discussion for Louisiana Indigenous artists. And I'm eternally grateful to her for doing so.
Thank you. Lauren, your pieces literally put like this reflection of this particular experience, like right on top of this sort of very American item. And so, can you just talk a little bit about? I know that you talked about the origins of that piece, but what you're sort of hoping that people take away in terms of a particular action or a particular reflection on who they are and what role they're playing and what's playing out right now.
Of course. So I was rereading the letter that James Baldwin was writing to his nephew, and there was one comment where he brings up, and it says, it was intended that you perish. And that kind of resonated because that I remember my parents talking about this of like when they were in school, that they were supposed to fail. And it was this kind of idea of failure because they were not part of the status quo. They were immigrants, they came in to the States, it was different for them. And then kind of defeating that idea and actually like living the American dream and working hard for that. And so like that kind of reminds me of the sacrifices that my parents made so that I could be in this situation, like be here today with other artists, and we can share our voice and kind of elevate individuals that are normally not able to be heard. Um, and and so my hope is that like individuals will look at these pieces and kind of take a stand for what Baldwin is talking about, to kind of with love and care to help their fellow countrymen, like to that we are kind of building this what America must become to be better, but all together, and kind of forcing that change in history, and but not in a negative way, like just addressing things, the history that has happened, and allowing them to understand that there can be change and there can be hope as we move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Annie Laurie, when I experience your work, it makes me very anxious. It makes me feel very paranoid. And it's interesting because I think the themes that you're exploring are things that we're constantly talking about, but it doesn't resonate in the same way. And one of the things that you talk about is that you try to help people visualize the thing that is sort of like this insidious and invisible, but also somewhat visible part of our lives. And so I think I'm sort of interested in who you'd like to hold accountable. Is it, you know, the users of this technologies? Is it the people who create and are managing these technologies? Like where do you feel is sort of the responsibility and sort of immediate opportunity to create change around our relationship to technology?
Totally. Yeah, I mean, the short answer is like, I never blame myself or other users. I think that the system has been set up in a way that is rigged against us. I think also the most basic kind of principle that I have come to question through making this work and learning more about it is the principle of taking human experience, translating into data, and then monetizing that into markets that profit by selling what are referred to as behavioral futures. And that's the product that big data is selling. It's not selling our data, it's selling the ability to manipulate and control us, and to control what we're going to do. Not even what we've done yet, but what we're going to do. And that makes me incredibly anxious, that makes me incredibly scared, but it's something that I've tried to confront through this work. And you know, I think a question I want to ask is like, do we want to allow corporations to make money in that way, to support those markets and behavioral futures as we move forward as a society? And I don't think that's sustainable. I think it's doing a lot of harm. I think it's becoming more and more clear that the tech industry has been this driving force behind increased polarization, behind a lack of trust in each other, behind a lack of trust in the truth, increased alienation, loneliness, election hacking. I think these lists are just gonna grow and grow if we don't hold these companies accountable and if something doesn't change. So I think that the danger and the thing that I want to try to work towards in terms of changing the way we're going is that the way that these companies have been allowed to operate for the past 20 years, we're seeing that it's bringing out the worst in society. And it is, you know, I think what I worry about is that if we don't try to see what's actually happening, if we don't hold these companies accountable, if we don't regulate these practices, it's going to stand in the way of being able to tackle all of the other crucial issues that are more immediately and directly destroying human lives and our environment. But I think regulation of these very extractive practices, right? I think we've been extracting things irresponsibly for profit from the environment for a very long time, for hundreds of years, but now it's happening to us. It's happening to our psyches, where we're the product that's being extracted and manipulated. And what I want to hold that practice accountable. I think the users are not really given viable choices. And so it's got to come through breaking up the tech monopolies and changing the trajectory that big tech has been taking our digital experience and our lives.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to fully recognize that I'm having trouble answering this for myself. In Baldwin's letter, he writes that people find it very difficult to act on what they know. To act is to be committed, and to be committed is to be in danger. I would say that for many of us, there are aspects of our identity, there are aspects of our lives that either make us comfortable or anchor us in our identity and our sense of self that come at a great cost to others. And my question to all of you is, what are you willing to give up to make this country the place that inspires you and makes you proud?
Yeah, that's hard, right? That's real hard because I think, my question is like, what are the people willing to give up who have not been giving it up? It's like safety. I was writing recently in some of the writing, and a lot of my writing is inspired by Baldwin. Um, if I'm not even safe in my own bed, right? Like Black people aren't even safe in their own beds, right? Breonna Taylor. So it's like if we can't be safe when we rest, and everyone else is safe when they rest, or white people are safe when they rest, then like what am I willing to give up is a really hard question. I thought about it. I don't know that I could answer it, right? I was gonna come on here and say I don't really know. I'm interested for what other people have to say. I've given up sleep sometimes, I've given up it's hard because Baldwin is such an integrationist. And sometimes I want to ebb back against it and not actually want to have the conversations with white people that they ask of me to have. And if so, I want to have them where I actually am safe. Like I want to be paid for these conversations. And I want to also feel like who I'm talking to is listening, right? Because there's no reason for me to waste 2 hours of my time, no matter how much it costs, if no one is going to listen to what I have to say. So maybe something I'm still giving up and I have to question every day if I should be is sometimes I give up my mental health to have dialogues with people who I know may not listen, to keep including, I grew up in again, the rural South, to keep including some of those people in my social media circuit and listening to them talk about politics in ways I disdain. And still sometimes having dialogue with those folks at the behest of my mental health. And I do suffer from depression and anxiety, right? So it can be really tough. I have been physically assaulted by the police. It can be really tough. But sometimes I still have those dialogues, and maybe I shouldn't, but that's one thing.
Thank you. Does anyone else like to respond? It's a hard question.
Yeah, it's a really hard question, but I also think it's a really important thing for all of us to think about, particularly people that like myself that have been very privileged. I think I the place where I landed, and I think what I do on a daily basis is I do engage in practices where I give up my own sense of comfort and ease for the sake of thinking and research and making artwork that tries to bring awareness and knowledge to complicated topics that I think necessitate change. And so I think, continuing to be willing to not take easier paths, both with my teaching practice and with my artistic practice, to confront things that are really hard to confront. And we have all sorts of issues that I think we all need to keep doing that. And things are going to change if people that have easier paths don't very purposefully not take that easier path. To go back to the part of the Baldwin quote, when he talks about ceasing to flee from reality and beginning to change it, that's one place I go with this question, where that's something that I try to do with my work and on a daily basis is not flee from reality, even though that can be easier. To work really hard to see reality, even when it's difficult, and to try to change it and support the changes that need to happen to protect everyone. It's a hard question.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to tackle that one? Jeffrey?
Well, when I think about that question, I think the first thing I was thinking about are things you know. I know that there are indigenous people crossing a colonial border at the southern part of the United States. They are indigenous. I remember when I lived in Texas, someone said, "Why are there so many Mexicans here?" And I said, you do know where Texas is, right? These are brown people. They are members of indigenous nations crossing a border, and acts of genocide are being committed against them, period. Any definitions of genocide that you want to throw at that, any legal definitions, are happening. And I guess the question I always ask myself is, what do I have to give up? What is the thing that I have to give up? What is the thing that I have to do, or we have to do, to stop that? And that's one of the things that keeps me awake at night. I enjoyed the comments of Derek, who, by the way, I would like to just listen to for hours at a time. But yeah, people have given up a good bit already. People of color in this country, we've given up so much. And a lot of what I do is try to get back things we've given up, like our language. Ishikwe is one thing that we've given up and I'm trying to get back. But I wish I knew what to give up. And I think people should sit with that question for a long time and really think about what we do have to give up, what we do have to be less comfortable with, in order, now that we know what is going on, that we can not only look it in the face, but really do something about it.
Thank you. So before we close out, yes, I wanted to ask Lauren if you had any thoughts that you wanted to share on this question, or any other thoughts that have been generated from this conversation.
Yeah, so kind of thinking and listening to everyone's responses, and just kind of, I'd written a response and now it's changed, because it was one of those things that it seems like such a simple question, but also such a difficult way to answer it. I think there would be some individuals who can tell you, who are willing to give up everything for that fight, for that, to establish freedom for everyone, to establish equality. And I think we see those individuals that are protesting and being activists and kind of putting their lives on the line because they understand that it's so important. But then you think about, for me, it's what is it, out of boundaries, out of fear, what, there are things that I can't even wrap my head around. And then thinking about individuals of our past, our parents, our great grandparents, who have been through so much turmoil, and that sacrifice was not even a question. It was automatic. It was something that had to be done in order for us to be in a position that we're in today, that we have that choice and we can have this conversation. And we are able to take these risks. But I think it is something that, I think it's a question that everyone kind of has to sit with and can't be answered lightly. I think we all kind of are attempting to grapple with that. And that's why we make the work that we make. And we challenge our audience and our students and the viewers, because we want them to engage, because we want them to ask those questions. So I appreciate everyone's responses. It's been enlightening in a really great way, and I look forward to seeing everyone's work in person to kind of pull this together.
Thank you so much. I think that is a absolutely perfect conclusion to this conversation. Thank you all for your time, for your thoughtfulness, and for your energy. This was really wonderful. And thank you so much.
Thank you all for joining us for the CAC's first ever virtual opening night. We hope you enjoyed the tour of the exhibition, the conversation, and will join us very soon in the gallery with a mask to come see the show yourself. Have a great night.
I'm so proud that y'all are all featured downstairs. I really am. Thank you all. I think Jen is she's they're coming. They're gonna say hello, and that was really powerful and moving.
Oh, y'all, I can't thank you enough. That was incredible. So many people were so engaged over the Facebook. One person in particular, Rashida, was like quoting everything y'all were saying.
She was like, y'all are just saying everything.
So I'll follow up with an email.